I knew something was wrong when my husband didn't answer the door. Then I heard my daughter whisper from inside Dad. "I think Mom's home." I was standing on our front porch in Farragut with one hand on my suitcase and the other holding a plastic Kroger bag with a strawberry cheesecake inside. Not exactly how I'd pictured the surprise. I'd been gone almost 6 months. 3 weeks earlier than planned, I'd flown home from Alaska without telling anybody. At the time, I thought I was doing something sweet. Walk in, watch Daniel's face, embarrass Emily by hugging her too long, maybe order pizza and spend the evening hearing everything I'd missed. Instead, I stood there staring at my own front door. Daniel, nothing. I tried the handle. Locked. That was odd, too. Daniel usually kept the front door unlocked during the day because getting to it quickly in his wheelchair was still difficult. I pulled out my key. The first thing I noticed when I stepped inside was the smell. Not anything dramatic. Just a stale mix of old laundry, cold food, and that faint medicinal smell our house had carried since Daniel came home from rehab. A paper plate with 2 dried slices of pizza sat on the coffee table. An empty Gatorade bottle had rolled under the recliner. Emily's dining chair had been pulled into the living room and wedged beside Daniel's chair. Then I heard the wheels. That soft, rubber sound across hardwood. Daniel came around the corner. I actually stopped breathing for a second. He looked awful. There's no kinder way to say it. His gray Tennessee sweatshirt had a stain down the front. His hair had grown over his ears. He hadn't shaved in several days, maybe longer. One footrest on the wheelchair was sitting crooked, and the cushion under him looked flattened nearly in half. He gave me this stunned expression. Laura, surprise. It came out flat. Daniel looked past me toward the door like he expected someone else to walk in. "You're early, 3 weeks. Why didn't you tell me?" That was when Emily appeared in the hallway. And everything else disappeared. She was wearing an old blue t-shirt I knew well because I'd bought it for her the previous summer. Except it didn't fit anymore. It hung off her. Her arms looked too thin. Her collarbones showed above the neckline in a way they never had before. For one ridiculous second, I thought maybe she'd gone on some health kick teenagers do after watching too many videos online. Then she came closer. "No, this wasn't that, Emily." She tried to smile. "Hi, Mom." The Kroger bag slipped out of my hand, and a jar of spaghetti sauce rolled across the floor and bumped into the baseboard. Nobody moved to pick it up. I looked at Daniel, then back at Emily. "What happened, Mom? Don't freak out." I remember thinking there are very few phrases in the English language more effective at making a mother freak out than "don't freak out." I put both hands on Emily's shoulders. "When did you lose this much weight? I'm fine." "You're not fine." I said I'm fine. Daniel spoke quietly. "Laura." I turned on him. "What happened here?" He didn't answer. That scared me more than anything. For 11 months, Daniel had been recovering from a spinal injury after falling from a ladder while cleaning the gutters. Before the accident, he was the man everybody called when something broke. He could fix a garbage disposal, hang drywall, replace brake pads, and somehow still have enough energy left to argue with the television during a Tennessee football game. After the accident, he had limited use of his legs and still needed help with some transfers. That was one of the reasons I'd taken the temporary contract in Alaska. Money, plain and simple. The medical bills had chewed through our savings faster than I wanted to admit. Physical therapy, home modifications, an accessible shower, a ramp, a different vehicle. Then Emily would be starting college the following year. When the 6-month logistics contract came up on the North Slope, I said, "No." Daniel said yes. "We can survive 6 months apart," he told me. "We can't survive another 3 years digging out of this hole." His mother Carol backed him up. Carol lived 15 minutes away. So did Daniel's sister Melissa and his brother Brian. At the airport, Carol had hugged me and said, "You go make the money. We'll take care of everything here." And I believed her. Why wouldn't I? When Daniel first came home from rehab, Carol had been wonderful. She brought casseroles, drove him to appointments, learned how to break down his wheelchair and fit it into her SUV, sat with him when I had to deal with insurance. She had earned my trust, so I left. For nearly 6 months, my life in Alaska had been work, cafeteria, food, laundry, phone calls, and sleep. Every other Friday, my paycheck landed. I transferred money home. Daniel always told me the same thing. We're managing. Emily gradually stopped joining our FaceTime calls. Homework, headache, busy. Teenager stuff, I thought. When she did appear, she was usually in a sweatshirt. Daniel always held the phone high enough that I saw his face and not much else. I had noticed. I just hadn't pushed. That part bothered me later. Because when you're 2,000 miles away, it becomes very easy to accept the answer that lets you sleep. The project finished early. I didn't tell them. I flew through Seattle, landed at McGee Tyson, rented a Camry, and stopped at the Kroger on Kingston Pike. Milk, bread, coffee, Emily's cheesecake. Normal things? I wanted normal. Standing in that living room, normal felt very far away. I looked around. Where's your mother? Daniel stared at the floor. Daniel. She's not here. Obviously. Emily sat down on the arm of the sofa. I asked, "Where's Melissa?" No answer. Brian Daniel finally looked up. "They're away." Away where? He hesitated long enough that I knew I wasn't going to like the answer. On a cruise. I almost laughed because I thought he meant one of those 3-day things out of Florida. Then I saw his face. "What cruise, Caribbean?" I stared at him. "Your mother is on a Caribbean cruise." He nodded. "With Melissa? Yes. And Brian, yes." I started counting. Carol, Melissa and Greg, they're 2 grown kids. Brian's girlfriend, 2 grandchildren. I looked at Daniel. All of them. He nodded again. 10 people. I felt something in me settle. Not calm exactly. More like my brain had decided feelings could wait. Who paid for 10 people to go on a Caribbean cruise? Nobody answered. That was the moment I stopped looking at their faces. I pulled out my phone, opened our banking app, and when I saw the balance in the household account, I sat down. For a few seconds, I just stared at the balance. Then I refreshed the screen. Same number. I opened the transaction history and started scrolling. At first, nothing jumped out. That was almost worse. There wasn't one giant transfer with a blinking red arrow saying, "Here, this is where your life went sideways." It was hundreds of ordinary-looking charges. $460, $735, $900, $1,150. Groceries, pharmacy, household, reimbursement. That word showed up a lot. Reimbursement. I went to the kitchen drawer, found a yellow legal pad, and started making hash marks every time I saw a transfer to Carol. By the 15th one, I stopped. Daniel sat across from me. Emily was standing at the counter, picking at a piece of bread. I said, "Start talking." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Mom had access to the household account. I know that. We'd set it up before I left. Carol was supposed to use that account for groceries, prescriptions, co-pays, and whatever Daniel couldn't easily handle himself. She was not supposed to treat it like a family trust fund," Daniel said. "At first she used it for what we agreed. And then he looked at Emily. Emily looked away. That was when I knew this had been going on longer than either of them wanted to admit." "Therapy," Daniel said. "What about therapy? Mom thought 3 times a week was too much." I stared at him. "Your doctor ordered 3 times a week, I know." "So what happened?" "We went down to 2. For how long? A few weeks." And then he didn't answer. "Daniel, once a week." My stomach tightened, and now he looked at me. None. I actually laughed once. Not because anything was funny. None. She said I could do most of the exercises here. She said she was trying to save money. I put the phone down very carefully. Whose money? Nobody answered that either. I said, "What about Tasha?" Tasha Reed was the home health aide who had been coming 4 mornings a week since Daniel got home from rehab. She helped with bathing transfers, exercises, laundry, and the 1,000 little things nobody tells you about until somebody in your house suddenly can't stand up safely. Daniel said she hasn't been coming. For how long? 11 weeks. I looked at Emily. Something changed in her face. Not surprise, relief, like somebody had finally opened the door to a room she'd been trapped in. I said, "Who's been helping you?" Daniel didn't speak. I already knew. I turned to Emily. "No," she shrugged. "It wasn't that bad." "Don't do that." What don't make this easier for me? Her eyes filled, but she looked annoyed about it. I helped. With what stuff? What stuff, Mom? Emily. She folded her arms. Meals, laundry, his meds, getting him into the shower. I looked at Daniel. He couldn't meet my eyes. I said, transfers. Emily nodded. How often? She shrugged again. That little shrug nearly broke me. Like helping your father from a wheelchair into bed was the same as taking out the trash. Then Daniel said, there was one night. Emily shot him a look. Dad. What night? He swallowed. I slipped. Where bedroom? Doing what transferring? I looked at Emily. You were there? She nodded. He fell between the bed and the chair. How long was he down? Emily went quiet. Daniel said, about 40 minutes. I stood up. 40 minutes, I told her not to call 911. Why I didn't need an ambulance. You were on the floor. I was embarrassed. I stared at him. Then Emily said, I got Mr. Green. Howard Green lived next door. 68, retired from the phone company, always wore white athletic socks with sandals, and had opinions about everybody's lawn. I could picture him coming over in the middle of the night. I said, you went next door. She couldn't get me up, Daniel said. I looked at Emily. And you never told me. She snapped back. Dad said not to. Daniel said I told her you already had enough going on. Emily turned toward him. No, Grandma said if we kept calling Mom about every little thing she'd lose the contract. That landed hard. I looked at Daniel. Did she say that he hesitated? She said you were under pressure. That's not what I asked. He sighed. Yes. Emily was still standing there with that piece of bread. I noticed she had taken 2 bites. That was all. I said, what have you been eating? She rolled her eyes. Food. What food? Whatever. Emily, cereal, sandwiches, stuff. Daniel said there was always food. Emily looked at him. Sometimes. I opened the refrigerator. 1/2 gallon of milk, mustard, 3 eggs, a plastic container of something I didn't recognize, a bag of baby carrots that had gone soft. That was about it. I shut the door. Emily said quickly I ate at school. Every day, no answer. She had lost 16 pounds. We learned the exact number the next morning at the doctor, but standing in that kitchen, all I could see were her wrists. I had spent 6 months worrying about our mortgage, retirement savings, medical bills, and whether I was bringing home enough money. It had never occurred to me to ask whether my own daughter was eating dinner. That thought stayed with me. I turned back to Daniel. Why didn't you call me? He looked tired, not guilty, not defensive. Just tired, you don't understand. Then explain it. He stared at his hands. Before the accident, I did everything myself. I know. I fixed things. I drove, I carried groceries. I helped Brian move that ridiculous sectional sofa up 3 flights of stairs. Despite myself, I remembered that sofa. It had nearly killed all of us, even before Daniel's injury. He said, now I need my 17-year-old daughter to help me pull my pants up. His voice broke on the last few words. I felt my anger shift, not disappear, just change shape. Then I said something I regretted almost immediately. And because you were embarrassed, Emily got to pay for it. Daniel looked at me. I hated the hurt on his face. I also knew I wasn't taking the sentence back. Not yet. He said, that's not fair. No, it isn't. Nobody spoke. Then I looked down at my phone again. I kept scrolling. That was when I found the big one. $18,600. Travel agency. I tapped the transaction. Then another one. Airfare, hotel in Miami, cruise deposit. My hands went cold. I said, this is the cruise. Daniel nodded. I looked at him slowly. You knew not until after they left. How does your mother spend $18,000 out of our account and you don't know? She said it was reimbursement. For what she'd been covering things. Apparently she covered the Caribbean. Emily let out one short laugh and immediately covered her mouth. I almost laughed too. Almost. Daniel said there's something else. Of course there was. He told me Carol had brought him 2 checks while I was gone. She said they were reimbursements for groceries, gas, household supplies, and appointments. He signed both. The amounts seemed high. He signed them anyway. I sat back. That mattered. I wanted Carol to be the entire problem. She wasn't. Daniel had made choices too. Bad ones, passive ones, humiliating ones. But choices. I wanted to freeze everything right then. Every card, every account, every possible dollar. Instead, I looked at Emily. Then Daniel. No. Daniel frowned. No, what revenge can wait until tomorrow? Emily said, "What are we doing?" You're seeing a doctor." Then I pointed at Daniel. "And you're calling yours." The next morning at 9:03, Daniel and I were sitting in a bank branch with our IDs, 6 months of statements, and my yellow legal pad. The banker listened without interrupting. Then she said something I appreciated because it was the first uncomplicated truth I'd heard in 24 hours. "Mrs. Bennett, freezing a card stops future charges. It does not magically bring spent money back." "Good," I said. I wasn't expecting magic. She helped us remove access where we legally could change passwords and flag disputed activity. Some transactions were straightforward, others weren't. Then she turned her monitor slightly toward me. "There's something here I need you to look at." Several of the cruise-related transactions showed notes indicating authorization. My authorization? I leaned closer. I didn't approve that. Daniel went still beside me. I looked at him. He said quietly, "I know." I left the bank with a headache, 3 printouts, and a very different problem than the one I'd walked in with. Misusing money was one thing. Making it look like I had approved it was another. Daniel and I barely spoke on the drive home. He stared out the passenger window while I kept replaying the banker's words. Authorization, my authorization. Except I hadn't authorized anything. The minute we got home, I opened my laptop at the kitchen table and started searching. Old emails first. Then the family account we'd used for years for school forms, airline confirmations, holiday plans, all that junk families dump into one inbox because nobody wants to remember another password. It took less than 20 minutes. I found a forwarded message from Carol to Melissa. "Laura doesn't want us worrying about every penny while she's gone. She said we should enjoy ourselves." I read it twice. Then another. "Laura said this cruise is her way of thanking everyone for helping Daniel." I sat back. Daniel was beside me. "Did you ever hear me say that?" "No. Did she tell you I said it?" He hesitated. "She said something like that." I turned toward him. "And you believed her? I thought maybe you two had talked." "About $18,000. He closed his eyes. "I know how it sounds." "Good. Saves me the trouble." Emily came into the kitchen carrying a laundry basket. I held up a hand. "Leave that." She stopped. "It's just towels." I said leave it. She looked at me like I'd lost my mind. Maybe I had. Then she came over and glanced at the laptop. "What is that?" I showed her a screenshot Carol had forwarded. It was supposed to be from me. "You guys deserve something fun after everything you've done. Don't worry about me." Emily frowned. Then she said, "You don't say you guys." I looked at her. "What you say y'all?" Daniel actually gave a tired little laugh. Emily pointed at the screen. "You say y'all in texts all the time, even when you're mad." She was right. I had apparently spent 47 years preparing for forensic linguistics by refusing to abandon Tennessee grammar. For half a second it was funny. Then I remembered what we were looking at. "That doesn't prove anything." "No," Emily said. "But it's weird." It was weird enough to keep digging. That was when we found the timestamps. 2 of the messages supposedly sent by me had gone out during work shifts in Alaska when personal phones were locked away. Our site was strict about that. You checked your phone into a locker before going into certain work areas and got it back afterward. I knew the dates because one of the messages had been sent on a Tuesday afternoon. Every Tuesday afternoon I was in inventory review until nearly 6. I pulled up my old schedule. There it was. Daniel leaned over my shoulder. "So you couldn't have sent it, not from my phone." That still wasn't enough. I knew that. So I called Rachel Donnelly. Rachel was 54, divorced practical, and had once helped me through a property dispute after my father died. She was the kind of attorney who could tell you bad news without decorating it. When she answered, I said I need legal advice. She said that sentence usually costs money. Apparently everything does. I gave her the short version. There was a long pause. Then she said, "First thing, stop arguing with anybody. I haven't talked to them. Excellent. Keep being accidentally smart." That was Rachel. She told me to save everything. Screenshots, voicemails, bank records, emails, device logs if the bank would provide them, employment records showing where I'd been, and most importantly, not to start calling Carol a thief or a fraud until we knew exactly what happened. "Angry is free," Rachel said. "Proving things costs money." I wrote that down. Then I asked the question I really cared about. "Can I get the money back?" "Some of it, maybe. All of it, I would not plan your retirement around that." She explained what the banker had already started telling me. Carol had legitimate access to one account. Daniel had signed some checks. That complicated things. There might be unauthorized transactions. There might also be transactions we hated but had technically allowed. Being morally wrong and legally recoverable were not always the same thing. I hated that. I also knew she was right. After the call, I went upstairs and shut myself in the bathroom. Not because I needed privacy from Daniel. I needed privacy from myself. I sat on the closed toilet lid and thought about Alaska. For months I had told myself I went there because the family needed money. That was true, but it wasn't the whole truth. Some part of me had been relieved to leave. I hated admitting that. Daniel's accident had changed every part of our life. I had become his wife, driver, scheduler, insurance negotiator, medication tracker, income source, and the person who knew which transfer board worked best beside the bed. I loved him. I was also tired. In Alaska for 12 hours at a time, nobody needed help getting dressed. Nobody needed me to argue with Blue Cross. Nobody asked whether the bathroom grab bar felt loose. I was just Laura from logistics. And if I'm telling you the truth, that had felt good. I sat there thinking, maybe I didn't only leave to save us. Maybe I left because I wanted to get away. That thought hurt worse than anything Carol had done. Later that evening, I told Daniel. He listened quietly. Then he said, "I was the one who told you to go. That doesn't mean part of me didn't want to." "Laura, I did." He looked at me for a long time, then said, "Wanting a break isn't the same as wanting this." I didn't answer, but I remembered it. A little while later, Emily came downstairs holding a folded piece of paper. I kept this. It was the cancellation notice from Tasha's home health agency, 11 weeks old. I looked at her. "Why did you save it?" She shrugged. "I don't know." "Yes, you do." She looked embarrassed. "I just thought somebody should." That got me. Not because it was great evidence. It wasn't. Because my 17-year-old daughter had been living in a house where she thought somebody needed to keep paperwork in case the adults started telling different versions of the truth. I pulled her into me. She stiffened at first. Then she cried. Quietly. No speech. No dramatic confession. Just a kid who had been trying very hard not to be a kid. The next afternoon, a locksmith came over. Carol had a key. Melissa had a key. Brian had a key. I wanted that finished before anybody got home. The locksmith looked at the back deadbolt and said, "Bad tenant's family." He nodded. "Those cost extra emotionally." I laughed. I needed it. Then I went back inside and made their call. Not to the cruise ship. I didn't have some magical number that made a captain drag my in-laws off at the next port. I called the card issuer and the travel account department. I revoked every piece of continuing authorization tied to me that I legally could. I formally disputed the charges I said I had not approved. Then I waited. At 7:42 that evening, my phone rang. Carol. I watched it stop. Then Melissa. Then Brian. Then Carol again. 9 calls became 14. 14 became 23 in 40 minutes. I didn't answer one. Finally, I listened to a voicemail. Carol's voice came through sharp and furious. "Laura, whatever you did, fix it. You're embarrassing this entire family." Daniel looked at me. "Save that." Rachel had trained him fast. Then another voicemail came in. This one made the room colder. Carol said, "And don't think I don't have proof you approved all of this." I looked at Daniel. For the first time since I came home, I wondered if she actually did. The next morning, Melissa called at 8:16. I almost let it go to voicemail. Then I thought, no, I wanted to hear what version of this story was making its way around the Caribbean. I answered, "Hello, Laura, what are you doing?" "No hello. No, how's Daniel? No, how's Emily?" Straight to the money. That told me plenty. What do you mean you know exactly what I mean? Mom's card isn't working for half the stuff she booked. Behind her I could hear wind and voices. Then Carol farther away. "Tell her she needs to fix it today." Melissa lowered her voice. "Everybody's upset." I looked across the kitchen. Emily was eating scrambled eggs. Actually, eating them. Daniel was beside her with a mug of coffee. "I'm sure they are. Mom says you approved this trip." "I didn't." "She has your texts." "I know. She says you're angry because you came home, saw everything, and now you regret spending the money." I stared at the refrigerator. Emily lost 16 pounds. Melissa was quiet. Then she said, "Laura, that isn't all Mom's fault." That answer surprised me mostly because I agreed with it. "No," I said, "it isn't." Silence. "Daniel owns some of this too." Daniel looked over when he heard his name. I kept going, and so do I. Melissa clearly hadn't prepared for that response. "But your mother owns her part. Mom was trying to help. Then she can explain why helping Daniel required a Caribbean cruise." The line went quiet. Then I heard Carol in the background again. "What is she saying?" Melissa sighed. "Look, the signal's terrible. Mom is sending you the screenshots." The call dropped. 2 minutes later, my phone started filling up. Screenshots. A lot of them. And I'll tell you something I'm not proud of. For the next few hours, I got scared. Because some of them looked real. There was my name, my profile picture, messages about money. One said, "Use whatever you need. I trust you." Another, "Don't keep bothering Daniel about every little expense. Just handle it." Had I written something like that? Maybe. 6 months is a long time. I had worked 12-hour days. There were nights I answered family messages half asleep with one eye open. What if I had given Carol broader permission than I remembered? What if she had taken advantage of it? Yes, but I had also handed her the opening I called Rachel. "I think I may have a problem." That would explain why you called an attorney. I'm serious. So am I. I sent everything. She called me back 20 minutes later. "Do not panic over screenshots. They look real. So do advertisements for hamburgers." The actual hamburger rarely has that much self-esteem. I laughed despite myself. Then she got serious. "Screenshots are not the underlying records. We compare dates, devices, account access, original messages." And Laura. "What your memory is not evidence in either direction." That sentence helped. We started checking dates. One supposed message had been sent at 3:11 p.m. Alaska time on a Tuesday. I pulled up my work schedule, inventory review. My phone would have been in a locker. Another came during a restricted site visit. Same problem. Rachel requested what records she could and told me to ask my employer for documentation. But she also warned me not to start celebrating. You may be right and still not recover every dollar. I know. No, you know the sentence. I need you to understand it. I got quiet, she continued. Daniel signed checks. Carol had legitimate account access. There may be transactions that were dishonest in spirit but difficult to recover legally. So she can just keep the money. I didn't say that. It sounds like that. It sounds like law. I hated law that morning. By Thursday afternoon, I hated almost everything. I had restarted Daniel's home health services, scheduled therapy, taken Emily back for a follow-up, called the insurance company twice, talked to the bank 3 times, emailed Rachel enough documents to qualify as a pen pal, and every one of those things cost money, time, or both. That evening, I sat in my car outside Walgreens with Daniel's prescription in the passenger seat and cried. Nothing elegant about it. I was tired. I kept thinking that if I'd stayed home, maybe Emily wouldn't have lost 16 pounds. Maybe Daniel wouldn't have spent 40 minutes on the floor. Maybe Carol never would have gotten control of anything. Then a minivan parked beside me. There was a bumper sticker on the back. My grandkid is an honor student. I wiped my face because apparently I had enough dignity left to refuse to have a nervous breakdown in front of somebody's proud grandmother. When I got home, Daniel was waiting in the kitchen. "You okay? Fantastic. Laura, I'm tired." He nodded. I put the pharmacy bag down harder than necessary. Then I said I shouldn't have left. His expression changed. "We've been over this." "No, we haven't. You took a job, I left you here, I told you to go. And you let Emily become your caregiver. That one hurt him, I saw it." But this time he didn't defend himself. He stared down at his hands. After a while he said I was scared. "Of what? Of you seeing me like this?" I almost laughed. "I saw you every night. You saw this much." He held one hand across his chest. "Face, shoulders, maybe a nice wall behind me." I sat down. He said, "Before the accident, if something needed doing, I did it. Then suddenly I couldn't get from the bed to the chair without somebody standing there." His voice got quieter. I was more scared of looking helpless than I was willing to admit. He looked toward the stairs, and Emily paid for it. That was the first time he said it without an excuse attached. Later, he asked Emily to sit with us. He didn't make a speech. Thank God. Daniel has never been good at speeches. He said I put things on you that never should have been yours. Emily shrugged. "I could handle it, I know. Then you shouldn't have had to." She stopped. That distinction seemed to reach her. Monday morning, Tasha Reed came through our front door carrying the same oversized tote bag she'd always brought. She took one look at Daniel and said, "Well, you certainly made a mess while I was gone." He laughed, a real laugh. Emily stood at the bottom of the stairs for a second. Then she said, "I'm going to my room." I almost told her to leave the door open. Pure maternal reflex. Instead, I said, "Okay." She went upstairs. And she didn't ask Daniel if he needed water first. She didn't check his medication. She didn't ask when he wanted lunch. She just went upstairs and shut her bedroom door. I stood in the kitchen listening to Tasha boss Daniel around. That might have been the first moment I believed we could fix any of this. Meanwhile, Paradise was apparently deteriorating. Melissa texted that 2 excursions had been canceled. A spa appointment disappeared. Brian's girlfriend started keeping receipts because she didn't want anybody accusing her of spending someone else's money. Greg had learned Carol hadn't personally paid for the trip. He was asking questions. 10 adults on a luxury cruise had apparently discovered there are few things less relaxing than a group discussion about available credit. They weren't stranded. They weren't starving. Nobody had thrown them off the ship. They simply had to start paying for themselves. And somehow that had ruined everything. The cruise returned to Miami a few days later. That afternoon, Melissa texted Daniel. "Mom says everyone is coming over Sunday at 1. She says this needs to be settled face to face." Daniel showed me the message. "You want me to tell them not to come?" I read it again. A week earlier, I probably would have. Instead, I handed him the phone. "No?" He frowned. "No, let them come." Then I called Rachel. After that, I called Howard Green next door, and finally I called Tasha. For the first time since I'd come home, I wasn't chasing Carol's version of events. She was coming to mine. At 12:57 Sunday afternoon, I heard a car door slam outside. Then another. Daniel was in the living room. Emily was upstairs. Rachel sat at our dining table with a folder in front of her and a cup of coffee she'd barely touched. Howard Green was sitting beside her in khakis and, yes, white athletic socks. Tasha was in the kitchen. I looked through the front window. Carol had arrived. Melissa and Greg were behind her. Brian came in another car with his girlfriend, Denise. Melissa's 2 grown children came too. Carol marched straight to the front door. She didn't knock. She took out her key. I watched her put it into the lock. Nothing. She pulled it out, looked at it, and tried again. Then harder. Daniel glanced at me. "You enjoying this, a little?" He almost smiled. Carol finally knocked. I opened the door. She held the key up between 2 fingers. "You changed the locks." "Yes." Why? I looked at her. "You really want to start there?" She pushed past the question, though, not past me. Nobody came inside until I stepped aside. That distinction mattered to me. For years, Daniel's family had treated our house like an extension of theirs. They walked in, opened the refrigerator, borrowed things, returned things, Sometimes. That Sunday they entered because I let them. Carol spotted Rachel first. Her face tightened. Why is there a lawyer here? Rachel lifted her coffee. Good afternoon, Carol. Then Carol saw Howard and Tasha. This is a family matter. I said it became Howard's business the night Emily knocked on his door because Daniel was lying on the bedroom floor. Carol turned toward Daniel. He said quietly, "She knows." That shut down whatever she had planned to say next. We moved into the living room. I didn't give a speech. I had no interest in becoming the woman who stands in her own living room holding a folder and announcing Exhibit A. I just went through what happened. Dates. Tasha's last home health visit. Daniel's physical therapy dropping from 3 appointments a week to none. The reimbursements, the transfers, the $18,600 travel payment, the emails telling people I'd supposedly wanted to thank everybody with a cruise. Carol interrupted before I got halfway through. You gave me access to that account for household expenses. I was handling household expenses. Was Royal Caribbean repairing the dishwasher? Brian made a noise that might have been a laugh. Carol shot him a look. He stopped. She turned back to me. You told me to take care of Daniel. Yes. And Emily. Yes. And I did. Tasha shifted in her chair. Carol noticed. I was there constantly after Daniel's accident. That part was true. And I wasn't going to lie just because I was angry. You were. Carol seemed surprised. I drove him to therapy. Yes, I brought meals. I missed appointments of my own. I sat here for hours so you could deal with insurance and go grocery shopping. I remember. Her shoulders relaxed slightly. For a second I could see exactly what she thought was happening. She thought I was conceding the argument. So I said, that's why I trusted you. She went still. You helped us when we needed you, Carol. I have never denied that. Then why are you treating me like some criminal because helping us didn't buy you the right to decide my 17-year-old daughter could replace professional care while you spent our money on a vacation? Melissa looked at her mother. Brian crossed his arms. Carol said, that is not what happened. Greg spoke for the first time. Then what did happen? Carol turned toward him. I arranged a family trip. You told me you paid for it. I did pay for it. With whose money? Carol's jaw tightened. I handled the arrangements. Greg leaned back. That wasn't my question. Brian sighed. Oh, come on. Laura makes good money. I looked at him. He shrugged. She does. Greg turned toward him, so Brian spread his hands. She can afford it. That was when Greg asked the question I wish one of them had asked months earlier. Did any of you ever ask what Emily was eating? Nobody answered. Carol finally said there was food in this house. From behind me came Emily's voice. Sometimes. I hadn't heard her come downstairs. She stood near the hallway. Her hands were clasped together and I could see her fingers trembling. Carol softened her voice immediately. Honey, you know I would never let you go hungry. Emily looked at her, then at Brian, then Melissa. So because Mom had money it was okay that I had to help Dad shower. Nobody moved. The room went so quiet I could hear the refrigerator humming in the kitchen. Emily's voice was rough when she continued. I missed school twice because Dad fell. Carol said, Emily, I thought you were handling things. Emily stared at her. I'm 17. That was it. 3 words. Nobody had a good answer. Daniel rolled his chair forward. I do. Emily looked at him. He said I should have called your mother. Carol immediately jumped in. Daniel, you were trying to protect Laura, no Mom. His voice wasn't loud. That made it stronger. I was embarrassed. Carol stopped. I didn't want Laura knowing how much help I needed. I let Emily do things she shouldn't have been doing. He took a breath. That part is mine. Then he looked at his mother. But you knew I wasn't managing. Carol shook her head. You told me you were, and you knew I was lying. That one landed. You canceled Tasha because it was cheaper. You kept telling me we could manage because it was cheaper. I was trying to preserve your savings, I said for the cruise. Carol turned on me. Oh, stop making everything about that trip. Greg actually laughed. Carol, we're here because of that trip. The room started dividing after that. Not dramatically. Nobody stood up and announced allegiance. Real families don't usually work that way. Brian still thought I was overreacting. Denise wanted to know exactly which expenses had gone through which account, because she wanted her name nowhere near any disputed charges. Melissa looked sick. One of her daughters quietly asked Grandma how much of our trip did Aunt Laura actually pay, for Carol wouldn't answer. That was answer enough. I let them argue for another minute. Then I said, "Here's what happens now." Everybody stopped. Carol no longer has access to any of our accounts. She opened her mouth. I kept going. Nobody outside this house gets a key anymore. If Daniel needs help, we hire professional help or we ask for it directly. No more family loans, no more cards, no more reimbursements I hear about afterward. Brian scoffed. So you're cutting everybody off? No, Brian. I'm stopping paying for things I never agreed to pay for. Carol looked at me with pure disbelief. You're destroying this family over money. No, I surprised myself with how calm I sounded. Money just showed me where everybody was standing. Then Greg asked something. What exactly did you do to the cruise? Apparently Carol had told them I'd somehow called the cruise line and sabotaged their vacation. I didn't do anything to your cruise. Brian frowned. Then why did everything stop working? I stopped letting my accounts pay for it. Greg stared at me. So basically nothing happened until Laura stopped paying. Rachel finally spoke. That is a surprisingly concise summary. Even Melissa smiled for half a second. Carol didn't. She left 10 minutes later. Brian followed her. Denise went with him, though she apologized to Emily before she did. Melissa stayed. Greg stayed beside her. Melissa walked over to Emily. I really didn't know. Emily looked at her aunt for a long moment. I know. Melissa's shoulders dropped. Then Emily said quietly, But you didn't ask. I watched Melissa's face, and I knew there was nothing I could have said that would have hurt more or been more deserved. I wish I could tell you everything was settled by Monday morning. It wasn't. That's not how money works, and it definitely isn't how families work. The bank investigation took months. Some disputed charges were resolved in our favor, others weren't. Carol had legitimate access to one account. Daniel had signed those reimbursement checks. There were places where what had happened was clearly wrong to me, but considerably less clear once attorneys and banking rules got involved. One afternoon, Rachel called and said, You can spend $20,000 chasing $10,000 if you're emotionally committed enough. So that's legal advice. That is life advice with billable hours. I laughed. Then I took it. We stopped chasing every dollar. That decision bothered me at first. It felt like letting Carol get away with something. Eventually, I realized I had to decide what winning actually meant. If I spent another year angry, paying lawyers and dragging Daniel and Emily through every transaction just to prove I was right, Carol would still be taking something from us. Through Rachel, she eventually agreed to repay part of the money. There was no dramatic check handed across a conference table. It came back in monthly payments. Very boring, very satisfying. Brian never really apologized. His version was something like, everybody could have handled it better, which is what people say when they'd like forgiveness without the inconvenience of admitting what they did. Melissa was different. She apologized to Emily first, then to me. I didn't immediately trust her again. She didn't ask me to. That helped. At home, things improved slowly. Tasha came regularly. Daniel restarted physical therapy. The first few weeks were rough. He'd lost strength, and I could see how much that embarrassed him. One afternoon, Emily and I went with him to therapy. Daniel gripped the parallel bars and pushed himself upright. My body moved before my brain did. I stepped toward him. Don't, he said. I stopped. His arms were shaking. His therapist stood close enough to catch him if necessary, but didn't touch him. Daniel stayed upright. 1 second, 2, 3, 4. Then he lowered himself back into the chair. Emily said, 7 seconds. Daniel looked at her. That was 6, I counted. You count like your mother. What does that mean? It means optimism apparently affects arithmetic. I smiled. A few months earlier, all three of us had been helping one another in the wrong ways. Emily had been doing too much. Daniel had been pretending he needed too little. I had been trying to solve everything with money from 2,000 miles away. That afternoon, helping Daniel meant standing there and not grabbing him. Funny how complicated help can get. Daniel and I also started marriage counseling. I wasn't thrilled about it. Neither was he. The first time the counselor asked what we hoped to accomplish, Daniel said, "Get through 1 hour without my wife firing me." I said, "He's already on probation." The counselor didn't laugh. Daniel looked at me afterward and said, "We're paying somebody not to appreciate us." But we kept going. He talked about his pride. I talked about Alaska. Eventually, I admitted out loud what I'd only barely admitted to myself before. Taking that job had been a sacrifice. It had also been an escape. For 6 months, I hadn't been the wife of a man with a spinal injury. I hadn't been the woman arguing with insurance companies or checking grab bars in the shower. I'd been Laura from logistics. Daniel didn't punish me for saying that. He understood it better than I expected. And I stopped punishing him for being ashamed of what his body couldn't do, not excusing him. There's a difference. Emily recovered too. Her doctor was happy with her weight and her blood work. But the change I cared about most had nothing to do with a scale. She became 17 again. College applications appeared all over the kitchen. She went to prom. She played music upstairs louder than any reasonable person needs music to be. She left the same empty coffee cup in my car for 6 days. I finally held it up one morning. "Are you emotionally attached to this?" I forgot it. 6 times, consistency is a virtue. That girl was coming back. One Saturday morning, Daniel decided to make pancakes. The first one came out shaped vaguely like Tennessee after some sort of geological emergency. Emily studied it. "Do we eat this or report it?" Daniel pointed the spatula at her. "You were easier when you were little." "No, I wasn't." "No, I said." She really wasn't. We laughed, and I remember standing there thinking how ordinary the moment was. For a long time, ordinary had seemed like such a small thing to want. It didn't anymore. Carol stayed away. 3 months passed, then 4. One Saturday afternoon, the doorbell rang. I was folding laundry in the living room. I looked through the glass. Carol. And here's the strange part. The doorbell affected me more than seeing her did. For almost 20 years, Carol had walked into our house. Sometimes she'd knock once while opening the door, which doesn't count. Now she was standing outside waiting. I opened it. "Hi. Hello, Laura." She looked older. Maybe she was just nervous. "Is Daniel here?" "Yes, Emily upstairs." She paused. "Can I come in?" I didn't answer immediately. Then I stepped aside. For a little while. We sat at the kitchen table. Carol didn't give me the apology you get in movies. She didn't suddenly understand every selfish thing she'd done. She said she had overstepped. Then she said she had only been trying to help. Then she admitted she should never have used the money for the trip. Then she reminded me that she'd done a lot for us after Daniel's accident. It was messy, human. At one point she said, "You could have handled some of this differently." A few months earlier, that sentence would have started another war. Instead, I said, "Probably." She seemed surprised. Then I added, "But the boundaries aren't changing." She looked down at her hands. "I suppose things won't ever be the way they were." No. That hurt her. I could see it. So I said, "That doesn't mean they can't be something else." She nodded. When she left, she stopped at the front door. For the first time I could remember, she didn't ask for a key. I used to think loving somebody meant giving them access to your home, your money, your time, your energy, whatever they needed whenever they needed it. I don't believe that anymore. Love without limits isn't always love. Sometimes it's just permission. And Carol wasn't the only person who failed in our family. Daniel stayed silent because of pride. I ignored